They can't power a car or provide a habitat for local wildlife, but children are nevertheless considered one of our most valuable resources. And even though babies are essentially an infinitely renewable resource, that doesn't mean we can't run out of them. The global birth rate has fallen since the 1950s. The US birth rate has been in decline for decades. In 2017, the US saw the lowest number of births in 28 years and has been below replacement levels since 1971. And infertility rates are on the rise as sperm counts decline. We're not only running out of children, we're running out of sperm. Even Huggies and Pampers are feeling the pinch as diaper sales plummet. Could it be the beginning of the end for humanity? Maybe, but less children might be a sign that the world is getting better. But first, we have to talk about a guy named M. King Hubbard. M. King Hubbard wasn't a king. He was a geophysicist, a king among the rocks, some might say. Not me, though. While M. King Hubbard was a consummate scientist with a keen mind for calculating the size of underground water reservoirs and oil deposits, he's most famous for his curves. Bell curves, that is. Hubbard predicted that the rate of production from an oil reserve, whether it be a single oil field or that of the entire planet, would resemble a bell curve. Over time, the amount of oil extracted from the reservoir would grow until it reached a peak, the top of the bell curve, after which supplies would consistently dwindle until the oil was essentially gone. That moment, right before the drop-off, was dubbed peak oil. Hubbard predicted the US would reach peak oil sometime between 1965 and 1970. And it did in 1970. That is, until hydraulic fracking and improved extraction technology revitalized the industry in the early 21st century. Hubbard also forecasted that worldwide oil production would peak sometime around the year 2000. It didn't, but revised predictions put peak oil at somewhere between now and 2030. Despite some imprecision in his early models, Hubbard's luscious curves could also be used to predict the depletion of all kinds of resources, from gold to natural gas to uranium. But it can also be applied to renewable resources. In 1992, the cod population in the Northwest Atlantic collapsed. Even though fish can replenish their numbers through the magic of biological reproduction, reckless fishing practices and ecological ignorance meant the cod were captured far faster than their populations could recover. The rate of this depletion closely followed Hubbard's peak curve. So just like we can run out of oil and cod, we can run out of children, which has led some scientists to come to the conclusion that we have reached peak child, or are about to, because the entire planet is undergoing a demographic transition. And this isn't the first time. In the beginning, the babies born were many, but so were the deaths. Either by disease or famine or some natural disaster, our population was held in a perpetual balancing act between the number of children born and the number deceased. This was the state of things for most of human history. But at some point, we got better at fending off disease and feeding ourselves, and the birth rate increased, and so did our lifespans, and populations exploded. The human population on Earth first reached 1 billion at the beginning of the 1800s. It wasn't until 1927 when we reached 2 billion, over a century. But it took less than 50 years to double that. But as nations become wealthier and the populations become healthier and better educated, especially women, birth rates begin to decline. In fact, nations with a low birth rate tend to have a higher standard of living. So a falling birth rate is indicative of a smarter, more prosperous society. Except when it isn't. Social welfare programs that rely on the young to subsidize the old in retirement, like Social Security or pension plans, can suffer if the labor pool is significantly smaller than the older generation it's meant to support. Like a Jenga tower where the lowest blocks are removed, the system will eventually topple. Then you also have an economic sector desperate for workers, because they were never born. And an economy lacking a workforce is like an engine running low on gas. Except when it isn't. A labor shortage can result in lower unemployment and higher wages, as employers compete for a dwindling pool of potential workers. And if there aren't enough people to go around, industries can often supplement the workforce with automation and robots, which they already do. Japan, Germany, and Russia have all experienced economic growth despite a declining population. With less children taking up space, a larger percentage of the population will be of working age, making a country's overall GDP higher than that of one with the burden of supporting lazy, unemployed children. And then there's the fact that land, housing, and resources all become more plentiful in this scenario. With less people around, there's more to go around. How exactly the economics of a dwindling population will shake out is hard to predict. A long, slow decline in the number of children is something we've never seen before on a global scale. We are in an unprecedented point in history. But any possible economic consequences of a declining population might pale in comparison to the environmental repercussions of overpopulation and excessive resource depletion. There are 7 billion people on the planet now, and we're fast approaching 8 billion. The carrying capacity of the Earth has been estimated to be somewhere around 10 billion. Beyond that, the planet just won't be able to support us all. If our population kept growing as it has been since we first hit 1 billion people, we'd surpass the carrying capacity of the planet within a few decades. Then we'd enter another unprecedented demographic transition, one where the death rate outstrips the birth rate, which is not a demographic you want to be a part of. On the other hand, our extinction might not come from anything as dramatic as a total ecological collapse. Over the last 40 years, sperm counts have not only been dropping, the drop has been accelerating. And unlike the largely beneficial societal changes which have been forcing down the global birth rate, this widespread infertility is a profound and deeply concerning biological dilemma, and we don't know what's causing it. But there are several suspects. Since the Industrial Revolution, we've filled our environment with all kinds of chemicals. Plastics like BPA and pesticides can interfere with hormone production. These contaminants could be making their way into our bodies and scrambling the development of male embryos while in the womb, hampering the production of sperm later in life. But chemicals aren't the only thing we're putting in our bodies. The world is getting fatter. The rate of obesity has nearly tripled in the last 30 years. Obesity can cause a complex array of health problems, one of which is reduced sperm count. Or it could be everything. We live in a fast-paced, hectic world where the existential fears of climate change, environmental collapse, and nuclear war live neatly alongside the everyday responsibilities of going to a job where you could be replaced by a robot, or going to school where you could be shot, or raising a family in a time where that is becoming a progressively more dubious proposition. No wonder self-reported stress levels are on the rise around the world, and stress is connected to reduced sperm counts. Or it could be all of the above, or something we don't even know about yet. Whatever the cause, we do have solutions. In vitro fertilization and fertility treatments can help people conceive. Researchers at Montana State University have even been able to successfully transform skin cells into something like a sperm cell. But there's a problem here too. Not all insurance covers fertility treatments. The cost of these medical procedures might make them out of reach for sections of the population. Then we might be living in a world where only the well-off and well-connected can reproduce, where children will be a privilege of the upper classes. So we're not doomed per se. The human race won't go extinct. Just the segments of society that can't afford not to. What exactly the future will look like is anybody's guess. Just as Hubbard's predictions for the end of oil had to be adjusted in the face of unforeseen technological advancements, our vision of a planet with less people will have to be periodically reevaluated. But dropping birth rates most likely will not result in the end of humanity, though it might signal the end of the unsustainable population growth we've seen over the last couple centuries. And that's a good thing, so don't stress out about it. That'll only make it worse. Special thanks to our Patreon patrons. Without their support, the good stuff just wouldn't happen. So if you like what we do here, go on over to patreon.com/thegoodstuff and become a supporter. And thanks for watching.